Alright guys, welcome to today's episode of Doomsday Pantry. First off, I would like to apologize for my absence the last few days. I have been playing a lot of video games. Not even gonna lie about it. Today, we are doing breakfast for dinner. Our ingredients are potatoes, half an onion, 2 tomatoes, and I'm gonna use an entire flat of eggs, and then cheese, but you guys probably won't need that much for however many people you're cooking for. This recipe can definitely be scaled down. If you're only cooking for one, I would advise like 4 eggs, maybe half a tomato, and a quarter of an onion. That's if you're, only cooking for one. So first things first, rinse your potatoes. I've already done that, so I'm going to start on to the next step, which is to use the medium-size hole on my shredder, and I'm going to shred these potatoes up. Alright, so you have rinsed and shredded your potatoes. Now, you're going to rinse them again, and then we're going to mix them with flour. Now, it's important that after you rinse them, you're going to try and drain as much of that liquid off as you can before you move on to the next step. Now, it is also important when doing any cooking at all to either have alcohol or lots of caffeine. We're going for caffeine. So I'm going to make a pot of coffee while I'm doing this. Now, what I do to get the water out of the potatoes is I stick it in a colander that's just got big enough holes that as much liquid is going to come out as possible, but not big enough that the shreds are going to come out. So if you can see there, much smaller than the size shred we got. And I just push. And then toss, and then push some more, and that works pretty well for me. And then, of course, since I'm doing this with bare hands, rinse your hand off afterwards, making sure not to get any more liquid back into the potatoes. Oop, done. And my pot's filled. Now, we've got about half of our hash browns, the other half is still in the colander, in here. We're going to take a 1/4 cup of flour. Not even going to need a 1/4 cup. We're going to sprinkle about half of a 1/4 cup in there, and then we're going to stir this up. Now, we're going to take our mixed up flour and potatoes, and then we're going to throw them on a sheet tray and throw it in the oven at 350 for about 5 minutes. Now, it is super important that when you throw it on the sheet tray, you flatten it all out as much as possible. That's going to reduce the amount of moisture in the mashed potato, in the shredded potatoes. The whole reason we're sticking it in the oven is to further reduce that moisture. And now, while we're waiting for those potatoes, we're going to crack all our eggs and scramble them up. And then we're going to slice up our tomato and our onions. Does anybody else remember that scene in Hercules, the Disney one, where he goes down to the Well of Souls in Hades? Is there? Yeah. This reminds me of that. I don't know if you can see that a little bit there, but you see how it's steaming? That means that we are accomplishing our goal. So now we're going to take them out and we're going to get them onto the flat top, or our griddle, and then we're going to take the other potatoes and we're going to stick them in there to do the same thing. Now, you are going to want to spray down your griddle. You could, of course, also use butter or bacon grease or really anything else. You just want it with oil on it. And it's heating up to 350 right now, so we're going to have to wait for... So I totally forgot the first time around, but when you go to do your potatoes, a liberal bit of spray is a good lifesaver. You'll know when your grill's good and going, because you'll smell the butter. Potatoes, spread on griddle. Let them sit. I totally lied about being able to do the tomatoes and the onions while we're cooking the hash browns. Hash browns are going to be done first. So, if you can see, we got some sizzlies, and it's steaming. That's what we're going for. We're just going to let this sit for a little while, though. I guess I'm going to cut up the tomato. I lied again! We're heating up some oil, and we're going to saute our onions first, because I decided I wanted some semi-caramelized onions on the side of our eggs. So, letting that heat up. and then we'll add our onions to it. But while we're waiting on that, it looks like it is time to flip our hash browns. As you can see, we've got some crispies, like, see, where's the camera? Like that one, right above my finger. So that means it's time to flip. All flipped up and ready to go. Now we're gonna season. Salt, pepper, garlic. Well, our oil is heated up. You can't really see it, but it's doing the steamy thing. So now we're gonna add our onions. Well, I couldn't find my regular salt shaker, so we used Lori's seasoning salt because that actually had a top. Alright, so now our hash browns are pretty much done. While we were waiting, we did pull the other ones out of the oven. So now we're going to stick these on a plate, and then we're going to throw them in the microwave to hold in the heat. While we're doing that, though, we are going to test to see if they're mushy. Yeah, they're still a little mushy. We're going to give them a little bit longer. And then if they're still moist, we're going to throw them in the oven again. Now that our onions are almost caramelized to where we want them, we're going to season up our eggs. So I'm going to use a little bit of onion powder, a little bit of minced garlic, and then some Lori's seasoning salt. Johnny's seasoning salt. Ha! I said Lori's, it's been Johnny's this whole time. I'm a liar today. Now, the real problem with making hash browns like this, so I just gave them another flip. But every time I come over here to play with them and test them, I end up eating like a couple of spoonfuls worth of hash browns because they're delicious. So always make more than you intend to eat if you're eating with other people. Now, we added our seasoned eggs in here, but it is important to remember that while you're cooking them, you need to stir regularly, because this is after like 30 seconds. You can see that there are chunks that are kind of already dark. So you want to keep an eye on this, stir it pretty regularly, let it sit for a minute, stir it again, let it sit for a minute. And I don't mean a literal minute, I mean like 30 seconds. Now I'm going to let it sit for about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to stir again. We're going to do this until it reduces down to mostly chunks. And then we're going to add cheese. Alright, as you can see, between me eating it and the heat, shriveling it up and frying it, this is reduced down to a lot less than it was before. So, this is why I made a lot. Now you're going to take all of this, and you're going to pull it off to the side. It is no longer mushy. We've got a fair amount of softness and crispness mixed in there, so we should be good. Now we're going to start our next batch. As you can see, our eggs are reduced quite a bit. There's still some liquid in there, but we're going to let that cook out as we add the cheese. I have done 1 handful of cheese atop the entire top of our eggs. We're going to let that sit and cook for a little bit, about a minute, and then we're going to move on and stir it, and then we're going to add another handful of cheese and stir it up again. And then it should be ready to go. Now we let that sit for a minute, and then we stirred in our cheese, we removed it from heat, and now we're going to add another handful of cheese to mix in there and let it melt. And we're going to let it sit. Now, it is important to remember that once you remove it from heat, that does not mean that it immediately stops cooking. Your surface is still going to be hot. So, the cheese will continue to melt into it even though the heat is no longer on and we have removed it from that burner. Our eggs are done. Using some of our hash browns, I already served the roommates. Then we've got diced tomatoes and green onions. Plate your eggs, top with tomatoes, green onions, and then a side of hash browns. And there you have it, folks. Breakfast for dinner.